She disappeared as a billionaire's wife, until her twin spoke the truth no one expected. I should have died in that penthouse. That's what my husband's doctor intended when he hid my lupus diagnosis for 4 months, kept me comfortable, kept me quiet, kept me dying. I was Mrs. Thomas Larry, billionaire's wife, mother of twin girls who would have been orphans by kindergarten if I hadn't done the unthinkable. I disappeared. Not because I stopped loving my daughters, but because the man who promised to protect me had decided I wasn't strong enough to know my own body was shutting down. And when my twin sister finally stood in his boardroom 6 months later and played the recording that shattered his empire, the one where his doctor said, "Your wife doesn't need to know yet," the world learned something powerful. Sometimes the only way to save your life is to vanish from it completely. The flash of the camera felt like lightning against my skin. I smiled. That's what you do when you're Mrs. Thomas Larry. You smile when they point. You pose when they ask. You become the woman everyone expects to see, polished, graceful, perfectly controlled. But inside my $40,000 Valentino gown, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would tear through the silk. Before I tell you what happened next, hit that subscribe button, because this story goes places you won't expect, and trust me, you're going to want to hear every single chapter. Now let me take you back to that night. "Marie, darling, just one more," the photographer called out, gesturing for Thomas and me to move closer together. Thomas's hand found the small of my back. To everyone watching, it looked protective, loving, even. I understood better. His fingers pressed just hard enough to remind me he was watching. He was always watching. The charity gala at the Ritz-Carlton was supposed to celebrate the opening of Thomas's new medical research facility. 200 of Chicago's wealthiest citizens filled the ballroom. Champagne flowed. String quartets played softly in the background. Women in jewels that cost more than most people's homes laughed behind crystal glasses. And I stood in the center of it all, dying. Not dramatically, not suddenly. Just slowly, quietly, in a way no one could see. "You look stunning tonight," Amanda Bianco whispered as she passed me near the dessert table. She was one of Thomas's business partners, elegant and sharp-eyed. "That dress is perfection." "Thank you," I said, and even my voice sounded like someone else's. She didn't know. None of them knew. How could they, when I barely knew myself anymore? 6 months ago, I started feeling off. Dizzy spells that came out of nowhere. Exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. A strange, persistent pain in my chest that felt like my body was trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. I'd told Thomas, of course. He'd been concerned, attentive even. He'd called his personal physician, Dr. Marcus Sanders, who'd run tests and assured me it was just stress. "You're doing too much, Mrs. Larry, doctor," Sanders had said with a kind smile. "Charity events, the twins, managing the household. Your body is simply asking you to slow down." Thomas had nodded in agreement. "Maybe you should skip a few events this month, rest more." And I'd believe them, because why wouldn't I? But my body didn't stop whispering. It started screaming. 3 weeks ago, I fainted in the middle of Betty and Maria's ballet recital. One moment I was clapping for my daughters, and the next I was on the floor, surrounded by panicked faces. Thomas rushed me to the hospital. More tests, more reassurances. "Anxiety," they said. "Possibly a mild panic disorder." They prescribed pills, suggested therapy, told me to meditate, but something didn't sit right. And here's where I need you to pay attention, because what I'm about to tell you is the moment everything started to unravel. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt like something was wrong, but everyone kept telling you it was all in your head. I want to know, I'm not alone in this. Why was I always seeing Thomas's doctors? Why did my medical records take so long to arrive? Why did Dr. Sanders keep speaking to Thomas first, as if I wasn't even in the room? And why, when I asked to see a different doctor, did Thomas's face tighten in that way it did when he was holding back frustration? "Marie, sweetheart," he'd said gently, "Dr. Sanders is one of the best physicians in the country. You don't need a second opinion. You need to trust the process. Trust the process." That phrase would become the words I'd remember during our final confrontation, the ones I'd throw back at him. I'd heard that phrase so many times it had started to sound like a threat. Tonight, standing in this ballroom surrounded by people who thought I had everything, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. And then I saw her, Ellis, my twin sister. She wasn't supposed to be here. Ellis avoided these events like they carried diseases. She hated the pretense, the false smiles, the way people in Thomas's world spoke in boardroom language, even at parties. But there she was, standing near the back entrance, wearing a simple black dress that made her look like she worked for the catering company. Our eyes met across the room, and in that single look, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Someone who saw me. Not Mrs. Thomas Larry, not the billionaire's wife, not the mother who was handling everything beautifully. Just Marie. Ellis tilted her head slightly toward the hallway, a silent question. "Can we talk?" My pulse quickened. Thomas was busy shaking hands with Gerald Bianco, one of his investors. I had maybe 3 minutes before he'd notice I was gone. I set my champagne glass down and slipped through the crowd as gracefully as I could, heading toward the corridor that led to the private restrooms. Ellis was waiting for me near the code check, her expression tight with worry. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. "I needed to see you," she said. Her voice was low, urgent. "Marie, we need to talk. Now. I can't just disappear." "Yes, you can." She grabbed my wrist, and I felt the tremble in her hands. "Marie, something's wrong. Really wrong." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Ellis glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wasn't supposed to have this," she said, "but I still have access codes from when I worked at a medical records consulting firm. I knew where to look, and I knew you weren't getting the full picture." She pressed the paper into my hands. "Read it." With shaking fingers, I unfolded the document. It was a lab report, my name at the top, test results I'd never seen before, and at the bottom, in clinical, impersonal language, was a diagnosis that made my blood turn to ice. Systemic lupus erythematosus, stage 3. Requires immediate immunosuppressive intervention. My vision blurred. "That's from 3 months ago, Marie," Ellis said quietly. 3 months, and you were never told. If this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me right now, do me a favor, hit that like button. It helps more people find this story, and honestly, this is something everyone needs to hear. I couldn't breathe. The hallway felt like it was closing in. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Dr. Sanders said." "Dr. Sanders works for Thomas." The words hung in the air like poison. "Ellis, that's insane. Thomas wouldn't." "Wouldn't what?" She grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at her. "Wouldn't control your medical care? Wouldn't decide what you're allowed to know about your own body? Marie, you're not being protected. You're being managed." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I couldn't let them fall. Not here. Not where someone might see. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, and my voice sounded so small. Ellis's expression softened. "You disappear." "I can't just." "Yes, you can." Her grip tightened. "Marie, if you stay, you won't survive long enough to watch Betty and Maria grow up, and they will grow up believing this is normal, that women don't get to control their own lives." Something inside me cracked open, because she was right. And I'd known it for months. I just hadn't been brave enough to admit it. "I'll help you," Ella said, "but we have to move fast. Tonight." "Tonight?" My heart hammered. "Ellis, I can't just walk out of here." "You can, and you will." She pulled out her phone and showed me a screen with an address I didn't recognize. "I have a car waiting 2 blocks away, a clinic that will actually treat you, a place to stay where Thomas can't find you." I stared at her, this woman who shared my face but had always been braver than me. "What about my daughters?" "They'll be safer with you alive," Ellis said, "even if it means you have to leave for a while." Now pause for a second, because this is the question I need you to answer in the comments. Would you leave your children to save your life, knowing that staying might mean they lose you forever anyway? I'm genuinely curious what you would do. My chest ached. Leaving Betty and Maria felt like tearing my own heart out. But staying would mean they'd lose me anyway. I looked down at the lab report, still clutched in my hand. 3 months. 3 months of my life stolen because someone decided I couldn't handle the truth. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just Marie Kane, the woman who disappeared. I was Marie Kane, the woman who chose to survive. "Okay," I whispered. Ellis's eyes widened. "Okay?" I nodded, my decision solidifying with every breath. "Okay, let's go." We moved quickly through the back corridors of the hotel, past staff exits and service elevators. My hands were still shaking, but now it wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline. The cool Chicago air hit my face as we stepped into the alley behind the building. A black sedan was waiting, engine running. I took one last look back at the golden glow of the ballroom windows. Somewhere in there, Thomas was still smiling, still shaking hands, still playing the role of the devoted husband. He had no idea his wife was about to become a ghost. If this story is giving you chills, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. I slid into the back seat. Ellis climbed in beside me, and as the car pulled away from the Ritz-Carlton, away from the life I'd built, away from everything I thought I knew, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. But I didn't know then what I understood now. That my disappearance wouldn't just save my life. It would expose a truth no one, not Thomas, not his doctors, not his empire was ready for. And when Ellis finally spoke that truth to the world, everything would burn. Make sure you're subscribed because Chapter 2 is going to show you exactly what happened when Thomas woke up to find his wife gone. And trust me, his reaction is not what you're expecting. The real story? It's just beginning. Comment below, Team Marie or Team Thomas? And would you have had the courage to leave? The car ride to Ellis's apartment took 23 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another dimension. Every mile between me and the Ritz-Carlton felt like peeling off layers of a life that had slowly suffocated me. I watched Chicago's glittering skyline fade in the rearview mirror. Those towers of glass and steel that had once felt like a kingdom now looked like a beautiful prison I'd finally escaped. Ellis didn't ask if I was okay. She knew better. Instead, she handed me a bottle of water and let me sit in silence, processing what I'd just done. I'd left my husband, my home, my life. And somehow, I felt more alive than I had in 3 years. But as the adrenaline started to fade, a different feeling crept in. Not regret exactly, more like grief. Because once upon a time, I had loved Thomas Larry with my whole heart. Before the control, before the silence. Before I became an accessory to his empire instead of a partner in his life. The question everyone would eventually ask was the same one burning in my chest right now. How did I end up here? And the answer? It started 7 years ago in the most ordinary way possible. This next part is crucial to understanding everything that came after, so stay with me. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because what Thomas did in the early days versus what he became, the transformation is chilling. I met Thomas at a community center in Evanston, not a boardroom or charity gala. Back then, he was just getting started, a young entrepreneur with a tech startup and more. Dreams, then capital. He'd volunteered to teach a financial literacy class for single mothers, and I was there taking notes, trying to figure out how to stretch my waitress income far enough to cover my mother's medical bills. He wasn't a billionaire yet, he was just Thomas. Funny, passionate, a little awkward when he got excited about compound interest and investment strategies. After class, he'd approach me with coffee from the vending machine and an apology. I know I talk too fast when I get going. Did any of that make sense? I'd laughed. Most of it. The part about index funds lost me. Let me try again, he'd said. And we ended up sitting in that fluorescent-lit community center for 2 hours while he drew diagrams on napkins and made investing sound less terrifying. That was the Thomas I fell in love with, the one who saw a tired waitress and didn't see someone beneath him. He saw someone worth his time. Our early dates were simple pizza in his studio apartment, walks along Lake Michigan, dreams that felt possible. I want to build something that matters, he'd said one evening. Sunset painting the water gold. I believed him completely. That man disappeared the moment his company went public. When his startup took off, really took off, I was there celebrating with cheap champagne and plastic cups, genuinely happy for him. He'd worked so hard, he deserved success. The first shift was subtle. So subtle, I didn't even notice it happening. Thomas hired an assistant who started managing his calendar. Dinner dates that used to be spontaneous now had to be scheduled in. He'd apologize, kiss my forehead, promise we'd have more time once things settled down. Things never settled down. Within 2 years, Thomas's company went from successful to explosive. Acquisitions, partnerships, his face on magazine covers with headlines like Chicago's next tech titan. And somewhere in that transformation, the man I loved started disappearing, replaced by someone who led with strategy instead of heart. Here's where I need you to really pay attention, because this is how control happens, not all at once, but in tiny increments you don't notice until you're already trapped. Drop a comment if you've ever experienced this kind of slow erasure. I want to know. I'm not the only one. The proposal was grand. Thomas rented out the Art Institute of Chicago, filled it with roses, hired a string quartet. He got down on one knee in front of Monet's water lilies and asked me to be his wife. I said yes because I still saw glimpses of the man who'd drawn investment strategies on napkins. I said yes because I loved him. I said yes because I believed marriage would bring us closer, not push us further apart. I was so wrong. The wedding planning should have been my first real warning. Thomas had opinions about everything. The venue had to reflect our brand. The guest list needed to include his investors. My dress should be elegant, but not too trendy. When I suggested inviting my college friends, he'd frowned. Marie, sweetheart, this wedding is going to be covered by the press. We need to think about optics. Optics. That word started showing up more and more. By the time we got married, I'd learned to run every decision through Thomas first. Not because he demanded it outright, but because disagreeing felt exhausting. He always had a reason, always had a better idea, always knew what was best. And because I loved him, I told myself he was just trying to take care of me. The twins came 2 years into our marriage. Betty and Maria, perfect, beautiful, mine. For a brief moment, I thought motherhood would give me back some autonomy. These were my daughters. Surely I'd have a say in their lives. But Thomas had already hired the nanny before I'd even left the hospital. The best in Chicago, he'd assured me. You need rest, darling. Let her handle the night feedings. When I said I wanted to breastfeed, he'd look concerned. That's wonderful, Marie, but let's also have formula as a backup. You don't want to exhaust yourself. The nanny became the backup that became the default. Slowly, decisions about Betty and Maria's schedules, their pediatrician, their routines, they all flowed through Thomas and his staff. I was their mother, but somehow I needed permission to change their bedtime. If this is resonating with you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach people who need to hear it. And trust me, what I discovered about my health, you're going to want to be here for that. That's when the medical symptoms started. Looking back now, I wonder if my body was trying to tell me what my mind refused to admit. I was disappearing. It started small. Fatigue that felt deeper than new mother tiredness. Occasional dizziness I blamed on not eating enough. A persistent ache in my joints I figured was from carrying the twins. Thomas, I think something might be wrong, I'd said one morning after nearly fainting in the shower. He'd looked up from his phone, concerned. What kind of wrong? I don't know. I don't feel right. Let me call Dr. Sanders, he'd said immediately. He can fit you in this afternoon. Dr. Marcus Sanders was Thomas's personal physician, a man who'd helped countless executives manage stress and optimize performance. He was efficient, professional, and always available when Thomas called. The appointment lasted 15 minutes. Dr. Sanders ran basic tests, asked routine questions, and smiled reassuringly. You're a new mother of twins, married to one of Chicago's busiest entrepreneurs. Your body is telling you to slow down. But I am slowing down, I'd protested. I barely do anything anymore. The nanny handles. Exactly, doctor. Sanders interrupted gently. You're experiencing guilt about accepting help. That psychological stress manifests physically. I'm going to recommend some supplements and stress management techniques. He handed me a pamphlet about meditation. I looked at Thomas, hoping he'd advocate for more tests, a second opinion, something. Instead, he nodded. That makes sense. Marie, you do seem anxious lately. And just like that, my physical symptoms became psychological problems I was manufacturing. But my body knew better. The dizziness got worse. The fatigue became debilitating. I started losing weight without trying. Some mornings, I couldn't get out of bed without the room spinning. Every time I mentioned it to Thomas, his response followed the same pattern. Concern, followed by a call to Dr. Sanders, followed by reassurance that I was fine, I just needed to relax. Marie, Dr. Sanders says your blood work is normal, Thomas would say, kissing my forehead. Maybe you should try yoga, or take a vacation. But here's what I didn't know then, what Ellis would later discover when she accessed my medical records. My blood work wasn't normal, not even close. The test Dr. Sanders ran had revealed concerning markers 3 months before Ellis showed up at that gala. Lupus. Stage 3. A diagnosis that required immediate intervention. But Thomas never told me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known until everything collapsed, was that Thomas had another reason for hiding my diagnosis. Years later, after the truth came out, I learned that Thomas had been negotiating a massive merger during those months. $800 million. The deal of his career and a sick wife? A wife who might need his attention, his time, his visible concern? That was bad optics. So he'd made a calculation. Keep me comfortable enough that I wouldn't seek a second opinion. Keep me quiet enough that I wouldn't disrupt his business. Keep me managed until the deal closed. Then, and only then, would he discover how sick I really was and play the devoted husband nursing his wife back to health. The merger closed 3 weeks after I disappeared. He got his $800 million. I got my life. Whether he knew and decided I couldn't handle it, or whether Dr. Sanders managed the information before it reached either of us, I still don't know for certain. What I do know is this. By the time I stood in that hallway with Ellis, reading a diagnosis that should have been in my hands months earlier, I realized something that changed everything. My voice didn't carry weight in my own life anymore. I couldn't choose my doctors. I couldn't make decisions about my daughter's bedtimes. I couldn't even be trusted with information about my own failing body. This is where everything shifts, so make sure you're subscribed, because the next chapter reveals what happened when Thomas woke up and discovered I was gone. His reaction? It's not what anyone expected. I'd spent 3 years telling myself I was lucky, that Thomas's control came from love, that being managed meant being protected. But sitting in that car, driving away from everything I'd known, I finally understood the difference between protection and imprisonment. Thomas hadn't set out to trap me. I genuinely believe that. He'd probably convinced himself he was making my life easier, handling the hard things so I didn't have to. But somewhere along the way, easier became voiceless. And I became a ghost in my own story. The car pulled up to Ellis's apartment building, a modest mid-rise in Lincoln Park, nothing like the penthouse I'd left behind. Ellis helped me out of the car, and I stood on the sidewalk in my $40,000 gown, looking like I'd escaped from a fairy tale. In a way, I had. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever loved someone who slowly made you disappear? I need to know your stories, because this is more common than anyone wants to admit. Ready? Ellis asked. I took one last look at the city skyline, at the direction of our penthouse where Thomas would eventually realize his wife wasn't coming home. And I whispered, yes. Because loving a man who controlled the world had nearly killed me. But leaving him? That was the first choice I'd made in 3 years that was truly mine. What do you think Thomas did when he discovered Marie was gone? Comment your predictions below. And share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes the most dangerous prisons are the ones built with good intentions. Ellis's apartment smelled like lavender and old books, nothing like the sterile perfection of the penthouse I'd just abandoned. She handed me sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, and I changed out of the Valentino gown in her tiny bathroom, catching my reflection in the mirror. Without the makeup, the perfect hair, the designer dress, I looked like exactly what I was, a woman running out of time. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because the truth is, my body had been screaming at me for months before that gala. I just hadn't been listening. Or maybe I had been listening, but everyone around me kept turning down the volume until I couldn't hear it anymore. Let me take you back to when it really started. When I first understood something was desperately wrong. It was a Tuesday morning, 4 months before my disappearance. Betty and Maria were 3 years old, and I'd promised to take them to the aquarium. Just us. No nanny. No staff, just their mother and 2 little girls who loved watching the beluga whales. The truth settled in standing at the bottom of the stairs in our penthouse, one hand gripping the railing, trying to will my legs to cooperate. The dizziness had hit me the moment I stood up from breakfast, not the gentle kind where the room tilts slightly, but the vicious kind where the floor feels like it's dropping out from under you. "Mommy, come on!" Maria called from the top of the stairs, her little hand waving impatiently. I took one step, then another. By the 3rd step, my vision started to blur at the edges. By the 5th step, everything went black. I woke up on the marble floor with Amanda, our housekeeper, kneeling beside me, her face tight with worry. Betty and Maria were crying. The nanny was calling Thomas. "I'm fine," I'd insisted, even though my head was throbbing and my heart was racing in a way that felt all wrong. I just stood up too fast. But I wasn't fine. And deep down, in that place where your body speaks a language your mind doesn't want to translate, I understood it. Thomas came home early from a meeting with Gerald Bianco, rare for him, which scared me more than the fainting itself. He found me in our bedroom, still shaky, trying to convince myself this was normal exhaustion. "Marie, this is serious," he'd said, his voice tight with the kind of controlled concern that made him such an effective CEO. "I'm calling Dr. Sanders right now. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in Dr. Sanders's pristine office on the 40th floor of a medical building Thomas's company partially owned. Everything was cream-colored and expensive. Classical music played softly. It felt more like a spa than a place where people came with real problems. Dr. Sanders ran tests, blood work, blood pressure, heart rate. He asked questions while typing notes I couldn't see on his computer screen. Any chest pain? Sometimes. A tightness that comes and goes. Difficulty sleeping? Yes, but I thought that was just... And Thomas mentioned you've been feeling anxious lately? I paused. Had I said I was anxious? Or had Thomas said it for me? I'm worried something's wrong with me, I admitted. Dr. Sanders smiled, the kind of smile that's meant to be comforting, but somehow makes you feel like you're overreacting. Mrs. Larry, what you're experiencing is very common for women in your position. The pressure of being married to someone as high profile as Thomas, raising twins, managing a household. Your body is responding to stress. But the fainting can absolutely be stress-related, he interrupted gently, combined with the possibility that you're not eating enough or sleeping well. I'm going to run a comprehensive panel, but I want you to try something for me first. Reduce your commitments, practice mindfulness, and let's see you back here in 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I was worse. The dizziness had become constant. I'd lost 6 pounds I didn't have to lose. Some mornings, the pain in my joints was so bad I could barely hold my daughters. But when I returned to Dr. Sanders' office, he smiled and told me my preliminary results looked mostly normal. Mostly normal? What does that even mean? This is where I need you to pay close attention, because what happened next reveals exactly how control works in medicine. Comment below if you've ever been dismissed by a doctor who didn't take you seriously, because this pattern is more common than we want to admit. I'd like to see a specialist, I said, surprised by my own boldness. Dr. Sanders' smile tightened. Let's not jump ahead, Mrs. Larry. I've consulted with several colleagues, and we all agree. You consulted about me? With who? With Thomas, of course. He's very concerned about you. My stomach dropped. You discussed my medical results with my husband before discussing them with me? Mrs. Larry, Thomas is a man of science. He understands these things. We simply wanted to present you with a unified front so you wouldn't worry unnecessarily. A unified front. As if my health were a business strategy. I left that appointment with a prescription for anti-anxiety medication and a growing suspicion that something was being hidden from me. But every time I tried to voice that suspicion, I felt crazy, paranoid, like I was manufacturing drama where there was only concern. That's what gaslighting does. It makes you doubt the one voice you should trust most, your own. The worst moment came 3 weeks later. I was giving Betty and Maria their bath, something I insisted on doing myself, despite the nanny's protests. They were playing with foam letters, sticking them to the tile wall, and Maria was singing a song she'd learned at preschool. It became clear to me then, what if I'm not here to hear her sing when she's 5? What if I miss Betty's first day of kindergarten? What if whatever's wrong with me steals all the moments I'm supposed to have with them? The thought was so sharp, so visceral, that I had to grip the edge of the bathtub to steady myself. Mommy, you okay? Betty asked, her little face scrunched with concern. I'm perfect, baby. I lied. Mommy's perfect. But I wasn't, and they knew it in the way children always know when their parents are breaking. That's when Ellis started asking questions. My twin sister had always been the suspicious one, the one who questioned authority, who didn't trust systems just because they were systems. Where I adapted, Ellis confronted. Where I made peace, Ellis made waves. She'd been calling more frequently, showing up unannounced at the penthouse, watching me with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. One afternoon, she found me on the couch, too exhausted to pretend I wasn't struggling. Marie, how long has this been going on? She asked, sitting beside me. I'm just tired. No, this isn't tired. This is sick. What does your doctor say? That it's stress, anxiety, that I need to relax. Ellis's expression hardened. And you believe that? Why wouldn't I? Because I've seen stress, Marie. I've seen anxious. This isn't that. This is your body shutting down. She grabbed my hand, and I noticed how thin my wrist had become. When was the last time you saw your test results? Actually saw them yourself? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't. Dr. Sanders always explained them verbally. Thomas always sat in on the appointments. But had I ever actually held the papers in my hands and read them myself? They tell me what I need to know, I said weakly. Who tells you, Thomas or the doctor? Ellis, that's not fair. Thomas is trying to help. Is he? Or is he managing you? The word landed like a punch. Managing. That's exactly what it felt like. But I hadn't had language for it until she said it out loud. Ellis leaned closer, her voice dropping. Marie, I need you to hear me. Something isn't right. Not with your health and not with how it's being handled. The medical results, the delays, the way everyone speaks around you instead of to you. You're being paranoid, I whispered, but even I didn't believe it. Maybe, Ellis said. Or maybe I'm the only one seeing clearly. She stood up, and I could see the gears turning in her mind, my brilliant, stubborn, fearless sister who'd never met a system she couldn't hack or a secret she couldn't uncover. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to really think about the answer, she said. I looked up at her, my heart already racing because I understood whatever she asked next would change everything. That question would haunt me for 3 days, and then it would save my life. Ellis's eyes locked on mine, and she spoke slowly, deliberately. Marie, are you sure they're telling you everything? The question hung in the air like smoke, and for the first time in months, I answered with complete honesty. No, I'm not sure at all. The next chapter reveals what Ellis discovered when she dug into Marie's medical records, and trust me, the truth is worse than either of them imagined. Subscribe so you don't miss it, because this is where everything explodes. Ready for Chapter 4 when you are. Ellis disappeared for 3 days after asking that question. 3 days of radio silence, no calls, no texts, nothing. I told myself she was being dramatic, that she'd gotten caught up in one of her conspiracy theories about medical corruption or pharmaceutical companies. Ellis had always seen patterns where I saw coincidence, questions where I saw answers. But on the 4th day, she showed up at the penthouse at 2 p.m. a time, when she knew Thomas would be at his office and the staff would be on their lunch rotation. I opened the door to find her standing there with a canvas bag slung over her shoulder and an expression I'd only seen once before the day our mother died, and Ellis had to be the one to tell me. We need to talk, she said. Alone. Now. My stomach twisted. Ellis, what did you... Not here. Her eyes darted to the security camera in the hallway. Is there somewhere in this palace without eyes? The panic in her voice sent ice through my veins. I led her to the guest bathroom on the 3rd floor, the one we never used, the one Thomas had renovated but never bothered installing his smart home system in because it seemed excessive, even for him. Ellis locked the door behind us and turned on the shower, letting the water run. Are you serious right now? I asked, trying to lighten the moment even though my heart was hammering. Sit down. I'd never heard that tone from her before, not angry, but urgent in a way that made my knees buckle. I sat on the closed toilet lid. Ellis pulled a folder from her canvas bag. Manila. Thick. Worn at the edges like she'd been carrying it everywhere for days. What is that? I whispered. Your truth, she said. The one they've been keeping from you. What Ellis revealed in the next 60 seconds changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my health, and my survival. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now, because this twist is going to leave you speechless. She opened the folder, and I saw pages of medical documents, lab results, doctor's notes, diagnostic reports, all with my name at the top. Where did you get these? My voice barely worked. I still have access codes from when I worked at a medical records consulting firm 3 years ago. I knew where to look, and I knew you weren't getting the full picture. Just listen. Ellis pulled out the first page, a lab result dated 4 months ago. This is from your blood work in July. The one Dr. Sanders said came back mostly normal. I stared at the numbers, columns of data that meant nothing to me. Marie, look at this marker here. Her finger traced a highlighted line. This indicates severe inflammation. And this one? Autoimmune antibodies at dangerous levels. And this? She flipped to another page. This is a radiologist report from an MRI you didn't even know you had. That's impossible. I would remember getting an MRI. You were sedated for a routine procedure in August. Remember? Thomas said you needed to have some minor testing done while you were under anesthesia. The memory surfaced like something from underwater. I'd questioned why I needed to be put under for routine blood work, but Dr. Sanders had explained it was more comfortable for me, less stressful. I'd believed him. What did the MRI show? My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Ellis's eyes filled with tears. Marie, you have systemic lupus erythematosus. Stage 3. It's been attacking your system for at least 6 months, maybe longer. Lupus. the disease that attacks your own body from the inside. It's treatable, highly treatable, but only if it's actually treated. The bathroom felt like it was shrinking. Dr. Sanders said it was stress. He said, Dr. Sanders lied. Ellis pulled out another document. This is his clinical note from that same appointment. His actual assessment, the one filed with the lab. It says, and I quote, patient presents with concerning autoimmune markers requiring immediate specialist referral and aggressive treatment protocol. I couldn't breathe. The shower was still running, steam filling the small space, but I felt cold all over. That can't be right. Thomas would have told me. If Dr. Sanders found something serious, Thomas would he? Ellis pulled out more papers. Because here's a memo from Dr. Sanders to Thomas. Just Thomas, not you. Dated 3 weeks after your diagnosis. She handed it to me, and I read words that felt like they were written in a foreign language. Per our discussion, I recommend delaying disclosure of full diagnosis until patient is psychologically prepared, given Mrs. Larry's current anxiety levels, immediate knowledge may cause unnecessary distress. Suggest managed care approach with gradual information release. Pause for a second and let that sink in. Her own husband decided what medical information she could handle. Drop a comment if this makes your blood boil the way it made mine. He knew, I whispered. Thomas knew, and he didn't tell me. It gets worse. Ellis's voice cracked. Look at the treatment timeline Dr. Sanders proposed versus what you actually received. She laid out 2 documents side by side. One was a comprehensive treatment plan, immunosuppressants, lifestyle modifications, specialist consultations, aggressive but standard protocol for lupus. The other was what I'd actually been given, anxiety medication, vitamins, and suggestions to rest more. They managed your symptoms instead of treating your disease, Ellis said. They kept you comfortable enough that you wouldn't seek a second opinion, but sick enough that you'd be dependent on their care. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped the papers. Why would Thomas do this? I don't think he meant to hurt you. Ellis knelt in front of me, gripping my hands. I think he convinced himself he was protecting you, that he knew better, that he could control this the way he controls everything else in his life. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and relentless. But, Marie, intent doesn't matter when the result is the same. You're dying. Not immediately, not dramatically, but your body is attacking itself, and instead of fighting it, they're managing you into an early grave. The word dying hit me like a physical blow. Betty and Maria, my 3-year-old daughters who still needed their mother to teach them how to braid their hair, how to stand up for themselves, how to recognize when someone who claims to love you is actually controlling you. What do? I asked, and I sounded like a child. You have 2 choices. Ellis's voice was steady now, certain. You tell Thomas what I found, demand real treatment, and hope he listens. Hope he gives you back control of your own medical care. Or, her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made the air feel electric. Or, you leave. Tonight, right now. You come with me to a clinic where doctors will actually treat you instead of managing you, where you get to make decisions about your own body. I can't just leave Thomas. He's my husband. We have children together. Marie, if you stay, you won't survive. The words hung in the steam-filled bathroom like a death sentence. Because that's what it was. A choice between survival and loyalty. Between myself and the man I'd promised to love forever. He'll fight for custody, I said, my mind racing through logistics, through consequences. Thomas has unlimited resources, lawyers, power. He'll paint me as unstable. Maybe, or maybe when he realizes what he's done, he'll let you go. Ellis squeezed my hands tighter. But right now, this minute, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you're running out of time. Your body can't wait for Thomas to have an epiphany. I thought about the fainting spells, the weight loss, the mornings I could barely get out of bed. My body had been screaming at me for months, and I'd let other people turn down the volume until I couldn't hear it anymore. This is the moment everything changes. Share this story with someone who needs to understand why women disappear, because sometimes leaving isn't abandonment, it's survival. How long do I have? I asked. If I don't get treated? How long? Ellis's face told me everything before her words did. The specialist I consulted said maybe a year, maybe 18 months. The disease will progress. Your organs will start failing. And by the time it's obvious enough that Thomas can't deny it anymore, it'll be too late. A year to watch my daughters grow. A year of birthdays and bedtimes and all the tiny moments that make up a life. Or I could leave, get treated, Survive long enough to explain to Betty and Maria why their mother had to disappear. There's something else, Ellis said quietly. The medication Dr. Sanders has you on? The anti-anxiety pills? What about them? They suppress your immune system. They're making you worse. The bathroom floor felt like it was opening beneath me. Everything I'd trusted my husband, my doctor, my own judgment, all of it had been a lie. Not an intentional, malicious lie, maybe, but a lie nonetheless. And I had a choice to make. Stay and hope Thomas would suddenly see me as a person instead of a problem to be managed. Or disappear, get treated, and pray I survived long enough to explain it to my daughters. Ellis, I whispered, help me pack. Her eyes widened. You're sure? No, but I'm dying if I stay, and at least if I leave, I have a chance. I stood up on shaky legs, turned off the shower, and looked at my twin sister, the woman who'd just saved my life by refusing to let me die quietly. If you stay, you won't survive, Ellis repeated, and this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a promise. Chapter 5 reveals the night Marie actually disappeared and the planning it took to vanish from a man who monitored everything. Hit subscribe because you'll want to see exactly how she pulled it off. Comment below. Would you have stayed and fought? Or would you have run? The next 2 weeks were the longest performance of my life. I woke up every morning next to Thomas and smiled. I attended charity luncheons and nodded at the right moments. I took my pills, the ones I now understood were slowly poisoning me, and pretended everything was normal, because that's what Ellis and I had agreed. If I suddenly changed, if I showed fear or anger or rebellion, Thomas would know something was wrong. Men like him, men who've built empires on reading people and anticipating moves, they notice shifts in pattern. So I became the perfect wife again. Compliant, grateful, managed. It was the hardest role I'd ever played. Every morning, I'd look at Thomas over breakfast, his handsome face focused on his tablet, reading market reports while his coffee grew cold, and I'd wonder, did you know? Did you actively choose to hide my diagnosis? Or did Dr. Sanders convince you that keeping me in the dark was an act of love? I never asked. Asking would have revealed that I knew. And knowing meant Ellis had broken laws to access my records, which meant Thomas could use that against us both. So I stayed silent. One more time. One last time. But at night, when Thomas fell asleep and his breathing deepened into that steady rhythm of someone without guilt, I'd lie awake planning my escape. Ellis had found a clinic 2 hours outside Chicago, small, private, specializing in autoimmune disorders. The doctor there, Dr. Amanda Chin, had reviewed my stolen medical records and confirmed what Ellis had discovered. I was sick, but I wasn't dying. Not yet. Not if I got real treatment. But I'd need to disappear completely. No contact with Thomas, no phone calls, no social media, nothing he could trace or track or use to find me, which meant leaving Betty and Maria. That's the part nobody understands when they hear this story. How could a mother leave her children? What kind of woman walks away from 3-year-old twins? The answer is simple and terrible. A woman who knows that staying means they'll lose her anyway. If you've ever had to make an impossible choice where every option feels like losing, drop a comment. Because this next part, the night I said goodbye to my daughters, this is the part that still breaks me. The night before the charity gala, the night I'd chosen to vanish, I asked the nanny for something I rarely did. Time alone with Betty and Maria before bed. She looked surprised. Of course, Mrs. Larry. I'll be in my room if you need me. If you need me. As if I needed help putting my own children to bed. But I just smiled and thanked her, because I couldn't afford to be angry. Not yet. Betty and Maria's room was a masterpiece of interior design, soft pink walls, custom furniture, toys that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Everything a child could want, except the thing they needed most. A mother who was actually present. I'd failed them in so many ways already, but I could still save them from growing up with a ghost. Mommy, will you read to us? Maria asked, holding up her favorite book, a worn copy of Goodnight Moon that had been mine as a child. As many times as you want, baby. I climbed into Betty's bed, one daughter on each side of me, their small bodies warm and solid against mine. Real. The only real things left in my carefully constructed life. I read slowly, memorizing everything. The way Betty mouthed the words she'd memorized, the way Maria's fingers traced the illustrations, the weight of their heads against my shoulders, the smell of their strawberry shampoo. Again, they chorused when I finished. So I read it again, and again, and again, until their eyes grew heavy and their breathing slowed. But I didn't leave. I stayed there, wedged between my sleeping daughters, and I memorized their faces in the dim glow of their nightlight. Betty's nose, which looked exactly like mine. Maria's stubborn chin, inherited straight from Thomas. The way their eyelashes cast shadows on their cheeks. The little scar on Betty's forehead from when she'd fallen learning to walk. I was leaving them in a prison made of wealth and good intentions. But I was leaving them with life insurance. A mother who survived. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you so much that I have to leave. And someday, when you're old enough to understand, I'll explain why. I'll tell you that some disappearances are actually rescues. That some mothers love their children enough to become ghosts so their children don't have to." Betty stirred but didn't wake. Maria's hand found mine in her sleep. And I let myself cry. Silently. Completely. Because guilt is just love with nowhere to go. The next evening, standing in that hotel hallway with Ellis, holding my lab results in trembling hands, I made the final decision. I was going to live. Even if it meant dying to everyone who knew me. Ellis had everything ready. A car waiting 2 blocks from the Ritz-Carlton, new identification under a name that wasn't mine. Cash Thomas couldn't trace. Clothes that didn't cost thousands of dollars. We moved through the service corridors like thieves, which I suppose we were, stealing me back from a life that had already stolen everything I used to be. The Chicago night air hit my face when we stepped outside cold, sharp, real. I was still wearing the Valentino gown, still had diamonds at my throat, still looked like Mrs. Thomas Larry. But with every step toward that waiting car, I became more Marie Kane and less his wife. "You ready?" Ellis asked as we reached the sedan. I looked back one last time at the golden glow of the hotel. Somewhere inside, Thomas was networking, building his empire, completely unaware that his foundation was cracking. I'm ready. The drive to the clinic felt like crossing into another dimension. We left behind the skyscrapers and the lakeshore mansions, heading into suburbs and then rural areas I'd forgotten existed. Places where wealth wasn't measured in millions, but in acres, and quiet and the ability to disappear. This is where everything shifts from running away to running toward something. Subscribe if you haven't already, because Marie's transformation at this clinic, it's what makes this story so powerful. Dr. Amanda Chen was waiting for us when we arrived at 11 p.m. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and an efficiency that reminded me of Ellis. "Mrs. Larry." "Just Marie," I interrupted. "Please, just Marie." She smiled. "Marie, let's get you inside." The clinic was nothing like the pristine office where Dr. Sanders had performed his careful deceptions. It was small, functional, a little worn, real. Dr. Chen led me to an examination room and gestured to the chair, not the exam table, the chair where patients sit when they're about to have conversations about their own lives. "I've reviewed your records," she said, sitting across from me, not behind a desk, but across, like equals. "And I want to be clear about something before we begin. This is your body, your health, your decisions. I'm here to give you information and options, but you're the one in control." Those words, "you're the one in control," they hit me like a revelation. When was the last time someone had said that to me? When was the last time I'd been allowed to decide anything about my own body, my own health, my own life? I started crying again, but this time it wasn't grief, it was relief. "Can you save me?" I asked. Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Marie, you're not beyond saving. You're not even close. Systemic lupus is serious, but with the right immunosuppressive therapy, lifestyle modifications, and monitoring, you can live a completely normal life. Your disease is caught at a stage where we can achieve remission, but we need to start immediately. The longer you've gone without proper treatment, the harder recovery will be." How long was I going without treatment? Based on these records, at least 4 months since diagnosis, maybe 6 months since onset. 6 months of my life. 6 months of being managed into sickness instead of treated into health. "What do we do first?" I asked. And Dr. Chen smiled. "First, we listen to what your body is telling us. Then we make a plan. Together. Together. Not her deciding for me. Not my husband deciding for me. Not doctors speaking over me to each other. Together." That first night at the clinic, lying in a simple bed in a simple room with no designer sheets or security systems or cameras, I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Safe. Ella stayed with me, sleeping in the chair beside my bed like she used to do when we were kids and one of us had nightmares. You did it, she whispered in the dark. You got out. I left my children. You saved your life so they don't have to lose their mother forever. The guilt would stay with me. I understood that even then. Every milestone I'd miss, every bedtime story someone else would read, every tear I wouldn't be there to wipe away. But guilt is just love with nowhere to go, and someday I'd have somewhere to put it. I'd explain to Betty and Maria why their mother had to disappear. I'd teach them that survival isn't selfish, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is save yourself. For now, I was just Marie Kane, not a billionaire's wife, not a managed patient, not a ghost in my own life. Just a woman who'd chosen to live. And for the first time in years, when doctors spoke about my health, they spoke to me, not around me, not over me. To me, that's what freedom sounds like. It sounds like your own voice mattering again. Chapter 6 reveals what happened when Thomas woke up and discovered Marie was gone, and what the media did with the story of the missing billionaire's wife. Hit that like button if this chapter got you, and comment, what would you have done in Marie's position? 6 months later, I was alive. Not just breathing, not just surviving, actually alive. My body had responded to treatment faster than Dr. Chen expected. The inflammation markers dropped, the pain subsided. I gained back the weight I'd lost, and my face in the mirror started looking like mine again instead of a stranger's. But physical healing is the easy part. It's the emotional scars that take longer to close. Every morning at the clinic, which had become my temporary home, I'd wake up and reach for my phone to check on Betty and Maria before remembering I couldn't. No calls, no texts, no digital footprint Thomas could trace. Ellis was my only connection to them, and even that was dangerous. They're okay, she'd tell me during her weekly visits, and I'd search her face for the truth beneath the reassurance. The nanny is good with them. Thomas is present when he can be. Present when he can be. That phrase said everything about what my daughters were living with. Do they ask about me? Ellis's pause always lasted too long. Every day. That's when the guilt would hit hardest, not like a wave, but like drowning, relentless and suffocating. I'd saved my life, but the cost was watching my children grow up through stolen glimpses and secondhand reports. If you've ever had to choose between two impossible options, comment below. Because this next part, watching Thomas on the news and seeing what my disappearance did to him, this is where I started questioning everything. Thomas had gone public with my disappearance on day 3. I'd watched the press conference from the clinic's small common room, Ellis sitting beside me, both of us silent as my husband stood before a wall of cameras and told the world his wife was missing. He looked devastated, dark circles under his eyes, his tie slightly crooked, something the old Thomas would never have allowed. His voice cracked when he said my name. Marie is everything to me, he'd said, and I saw tears, actual tears forming in his eyes. If anyone has any information about where she might be, please come forward. Our daughters need their mother. I need my wife. I'd wanted to hate him in that moment. It would have been easier if I could just hate him. But the man on that screen looked genuinely broken, like he'd lost something he didn't know how to function without. He's a good actor, Ellis had muttered. Or he actually cares, I'd whispered back. If he cared, you wouldn't be here. She was right, and she was wrong. Both things could be true. Thomas could love me and still have been killing me. Intent doesn't erase impact. The media had loved the story. Billionaire's wife vanishes was everywhere. Magazine covers, true crime podcasts, speculation on social media ranging from the plausible to the absurd. Some people thought I'd been kidnapped. Others suggested I'd run away with a secret lover. A few conspiracy theorists claimed Thomas had killed me and staged the disappearance. Nobody guessed the truth, that I'd disappeared to save my own life from the man who claimed to love me. The worst part was watching the narrative Thomas built around my absence. He established a foundation in my name, the Marie Larry Initiative for Mental Health Awareness. He gave interviews about the importance of recognizing when someone is struggling, about not missing the signs. He made my disappearance about mental illness. Look at this, Ellis had said one afternoon, shoving her tablet in my face. It was an article from Chicago Magazine. Thomas Larry opens up about wife's secret battle with depression. I'd read it in silence, my hands shaking. I didn't see how much pain she was in, Thomas was quoted saying. I was so focused on building our future that I missed the sign she was drowning. If I could go back, I'd listen more. Be present more. I'd make her feel heard. He's rewriting history, Ellis had said. making you the mentally ill wife he tried to save instead of the woman he controlled. But reading his words, I heard something else too. Regret, maybe even understanding, filtered through his inability to admit he'd been wrong. This is where the story gets complicated, because sometimes the villain isn't a monster, he's just a man who loved control more than he loved truth. Hit that like button if this complexity is getting to you, because it's about to get so much more layered. The hardest moments came when Ellis brought photos of Betty and Maria. I'd made her promise, no matter how much it hurt, I needed to see them, needed proof they were growing, thriving, existing without me. There was Betty on her first day of pre-K, wearing a backpack almost as big as she was. Maria at her dance recital, face serious with concentration. Both of them at Thomas's office Christmas party, wearing matching red dresses I hadn't picked out. I'd traced their faces with my finger like I could touch them through the photograph. They look happy, I'd say. They look like they miss their mother, Ellis would correct. 4 months after my disappearance, Ellis showed me a video she'd taken at Thomas's house during a rare visit. Betty and Maria were playing in their room, and Maria was talking to a photo of me on her nightstand. "Mommy, I learned to write my name today," she said to the picture. "See?" She held up a paper with shaky letters spelling Maria. Betty appeared beside her. "Daddy says you'll come home when you're feeling better. When are you feeling better?" I'd had to leave the room. Ellis found me in the bathroom, sobbing so hard I couldn't breathe. "This isn't sustainable," she'd said gently. "You can't live like this, alive but dead to everyone you love. It's killing you in a different way. What choice do I have? If I come back, Thomas will." "Thomas will what? Control you again?" "Marie, you're healthy now. Strong. You could fight him. With what army? What money? He has lawyers, power, resources, and you have the truth." That's when she'd first mentioned going public. "Absolutely not," I'd said immediately. "Ellis, if you expose what he did, he'll come after you. He'll destroy you legally, financially. Let him try." Her jaw set in that stubborn way I knew meant arguing was pointless. "Marie, you disappeared because he stole your medical autonomy. That's not just wrong, it's potentially criminal. And if we don't speak up, how many other women is this happening to? How many other doctors in his network are managing patients instead of treating them? This isn't about other women. This is about my daughters losing both parents because their father ends up in prison and their mother is painted as a vindictive liar. Or," Ellis said quietly, "it's about your daughters learning that their mother was strong enough to save herself and brave enough to tell the truth. Comment right now. Should Ellis go public with what Thomas did, or should Marie stay hidden to protect her daughters? Because this decision changes everything that comes next." I'd asked Ellis for time to think, time to weigh the cost of truth against the cost of silence. But the universe doesn't always wait for you to be ready. Then one afternoon, something arrived that changed everything. Ellis brought it to me with shaking hands, a letter addressed to Mrs. Thomas Larry at the penthouse, forwarded through Ellis's address. From Betty, dictated to the nanny, written in careful preschool letters. "Dear Mommy, I drawed you a picture. It is us at the park. You are smiling. Are you smiling where you are? Love, Betty." Attached was a crayon drawing, stick figures holding hands, me in the middle, even though I'd been gone for 6 months. That's when I understood. I wasn't coming back as Thomas's wife, but I was coming back as their mother. 6 months after my disappearance, Ellis came to the clinic with an expression I'd learned to dread: determined, apologetic, and afraid all at once. "What did you do?" I asked before she even sat down. "I contacted a journalist," she said. "Sandra Hayes, from the Chicago Tribune. She's been investigating medical ethics cases, and when I reached out about yours..." "Ellis, no, we agreed. We agreed that you needed time to heal. You're healed, Marie. Your labs are normal. You're healthy. And every day you stay hidden is another day Thomas gets to control the narrative. Another day those doctors keep practicing. Another day someone else might be going through what you went through." My chest felt tight. "What did you tell her?" "Everything. I showed her your medical records, the delayed diagnoses, the medications that made you worse, the memo from Dr. Sanders about managing your care without your knowledge." Ellis grabbed my hands. "Marie, she wants to run the story, with or without you going on record. Then let her run it without me." "She needs you," Ellis's voice cracked. "Your voice, your story. Otherwise, it's just accusations from a sister who illegally obtained medical records. But if you speak, if you tell the world what really happened, that changes everything." I thought about Betty and Maria, about what they'd think when they were old enough to understand. Would they see a mother who was strong enough to fight? Or would they see a woman who'd abandoned them and then destroyed their father? Share this story with someone who needs to understand why some women disappear, because the next chapter reveals what happened when the truth finally came out, and trust me, no one was prepared for the fallout. I need to think about it, I said, but Ellis shook her head. The story runs in 3 days, with or without you. Sandra gave us until tomorrow to decide. 3 days until the world would know I was alive. 3 days until Thomas would know I'd been hiding, healing, preparing. 3 days until my daughters would learn their mother hadn't died, she'd escaped. Did I make the right choice disappearing? I still didn't know. But I was about to find out if staying disappeared was even possible anymore. What Ellis was planning to do in his boardroom would make that grief look like theater. Because she wasn't just exposing him, she was dismantling everything he'd built his identity on. Chapter 7 is when Ellis goes public and Thomas's world starts to crumble. Subscribe so you don't miss the confrontation everyone's been waiting for. Comment, would you speak publicly or stay hidden? I didn't go public, but Ellis did. And 24 hours later, watching the live stream from the clinic's common room, I realized that sometimes the bravest voice isn't the victim's, it's the person who refuses to let the victim stay silent. Ellis had coordinated everything with Sandra Hayes from the Chicago Tribune. Not a newspaper article, not a quiet investigation. A full press conference at the Chicago Press Club, with every major news outlet invited. Thomas's lawyers had tried to block it. They'd filed injunctions, sent cease and desist letters, threatened Ellis with lawsuits for theft of medical records. But Ellis had one thing they didn't, the truth. And Sandra Hayes had made sure it was airtight, verified by independent medical experts who'd reviewed the evidence without knowing whose case it was. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. The same day, Thomas had a quarterly board meeting with his investors. Ellis had planned it that way. Maximum impact, maximum witnesses. I sat in front of the TV with Dr. Chin beside me, my hands gripping the armrest so hard my knuckles turned white. You don't have to watch this, Dr. Chin said gently. Yes, I do. Because this was my life being laid bare, my marriage being dissected, my disappearance being explained to a world that had called me mentally ill, irresponsible, selfish. The camera focused on the podium. Sandra Hayes spoke first, her journalist voice calm and authoritative. 6 months ago, Marie Kane Larry disappeared from a charity gala, leaving behind her husband, billionaire Thomas Larry, and their twin daughters, the media speculated. The public wondered. Thomas Larry grieved publicly and established foundations in his missing wife's name. Sandra paused, and I could see her gathering impact. But Marie Larry didn't disappear because of mental illness or depression. She disappeared because she was dying, and the people responsible for treating her decided she didn't need to know. The camera flashed to Ellis, stepping up to the podium, and my heart nearly stopped. She looked so much like me that, for a moment, the world probably thought I'd returned from the dead. Same face, same height. But where I'd learned to make myself smaller, Ellis stood tall. My name is Ellis Kane, she began, her voice steady despite the dozens of cameras pointed at her. And I'm here to tell you why my sister had to disappear to survive. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now, because what Ellis reveals in the next 5 minutes will change everything you thought you knew about this story. Ellis didn't hold back. She presented everything with the precision of a prosecutor building a case. Medical records showing my diagnosis 4 months before I was told, Dr. Sanders' memo recommending managed disclosure rather than full transparency. Treatment protocols that were proposed versus what was actually administered. Medications that suppress my immune system instead of supporting it. And then the piece that made my blood run cold. Financial records showing significant payments from Thomas's company to Dr. Sanders' practice. Not illegal necessarily, but suspicious enough to raise questions about whose interests the doctor was really serving. Marie Kane Larry was being managed like a business problem instead of treated like a human being, Ellis said, and her voice cracked just slightly. And when she finally discovered the truth, she had 2 choices: stay and die slowly, or disappear and fight for her life. The room erupted with questions, but Ellis held up her hand. I'm not finished, because this isn't just about my sister. It's about a system where powerful men get to decide what their wives, their daughters, their employees are strong enough to handle. Where medical autonomy becomes optional if you're deemed too fragile for truth. She looked directly into the camera, and I knew she was looking at me. Marie, if you're watching this, and I know you are right to leave. You are right to save yourself. And anyone who says otherwise doesn't understand what it means to choose survival over silence. I was crying. Dr. Chen handed me tissues, but I couldn't look away from the screen. Drop a comment right now if Ellis just became your hero, because what she did next, it takes this from a press conference to a reckoning. While Ellis was speaking to the press, something else was happening across the city. Sandra Hayes had coordinated with someone inside Thomas's company, someone who'd been waiting for the right moment to act. Ellis had arranged for me to watch it happen in real time. She'd set up a secure video feed from someone inside that boardroom, someone who'd been waiting years for Thomas Larry to face consequences. I switched to my laptop as Ellis texted me the link, my hand shaking. The quarterly board meeting at Larry Industries had just begun when security interrupted. Not to escort someone out, but to turn on the large screen at the front of the conference room. Ellis's press conference, live, broadcasting to every board member, every investor, every executive who'd helped build Thomas's empire. I watched on my screen as Thomas stood at the head of the table, mid-presentation about growth projections and expansion plans, when suddenly my medical records appeared on the screen behind him. The moment my name appeared, my diagnosis, my hidden treatment plans, Thomas stopped mid-sentence. I watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and then for the first time since I'd known him, genuine horror. Not horror at being caught, horror at understanding what he'd done. Gerald Bianco stood up. Thomas, what the hell is this? Amanda Sanders pulled up the live stream on her phone, her face going pale. And Thomas just stood there, frozen, as Ellis's voice filled his boardroom. Marie Kane Larry was being managed like a business problem instead of treated like a human being. That's when he looked directly at the camera mounted in the boardroom, and I swear he was looking at me, like he knew I was watching. Like he finally understood that the woman he'd controlled had orchestrated his entire world shift from 120 miles away. The news cameras outside the building caught him leaving 40 minutes later. No comment to reporters, no carefully crafted statement. Just Thomas Larry, looking more lost than I'd ever seen him, being ushered into a car by his lawyers. But that wasn't the end. Because Ellis had done something brilliant and terrible, she'd left enough evidence about where I'd been treated that journalists could figure it out. Not the exact location, but enough that they knew I was alive, recovering, and had chosen to stay away. The narrative shifted in real time. Social media exploded. She didn't abandon her children, she saved her life. Thomas Larry's concern was actually control. How many other women are being managed instead of treated? Share this story right now with someone who needs to understand why women disappear. Because the conversation this started, it's bigger than just Marie and Thomas. By evening, Thomas's foundation, the one he'd created in my name for mental health awareness, was being investigated. Dr. Sanders had been placed on administrative leave pending review. And 3 other women had come forward with similar stories of medical decisions being made without their full knowledge or consent by doctors in Thomas's network. The empire wasn't just shaking, it was crumbling. And I was watching it all from 120 miles away, feeling simultaneously vindicated and terrified. Because I knew what was coming next. My phone, the secure one Ellis had given me, rang at 9 p.m. It was Ellis. Marie, he knows you're alive, and he's asking for you. What do you mean asking? He called me. He's been calling for 3 hours straight. He wants to know where you are. She paused. He's different. I can't explain it, but something broke in him today. My hands were shaking. What did you tell him? Nothing. But Marie, he's not threatening legal action. He's not sending lawyers or investigators. He's just asking. Like a man who's finally realized what he's lost. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction. The man who controlled every aspect of my life was finally powerless, finally broken. But all I felt was sad. For both of us. For the love that had curdled into control. For the marriage that had died long before I disappeared. What do? I whispered. That's your choice, Ellis said. It's always been your choice. That's what we've been fighting for. Comment below. Should Marie talk to Thomas or should she stay hidden? Because her decision in the next chapter, it determines everything. The news ran the story for 3 days straight. Billionaire's missing wife. The truth behind the disappearance. Think pieces about medical autonomy, gender, and power. The invisible ways women are controlled even in wealthy marriages. Thomas didn't appear publicly. His lawyers issued one statement: Mr. Larry is cooperating fully with all investigations and asks for privacy as he processes this information. But privately, through Ellis, he sent one message: where is my wife? I need to talk to her. Not through lawyers, not through the press, just me and Marie. Please. The word please from Thomas Larry, a man who'd built an empire on never asking, only commanding. Something had broken. The question was whether it had broken too late. On the fourth day after the press conference, I made my decision. I called Ellis. Set up a meeting. Neutral location, just him and me. Are you sure? I thought about Betty and Maria, about the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become, about the difference between forgiveness and freedom. I'm sure, because he needs to hear from me why I left, and I need to look him in the eye and see if he finally understands. Subscribe, because Chapter 8 is the confrontation you've been waiting for. Marie face to face with Thomas for the first time since her disappearance. And what he says? You're not going to believe it. The truth is out. The empire is shaking. And now Marie has to decide. Does she face the man who almost killed her with his control? Comment your prediction for what happens when they meet. The coffee shop Ellis chose was deliberately ordinary. Not the kind of place Thomas Larry would ever step foot in under normal circumstances. Chipped mugs, vinyl booths with duct tape covering the tiers, the smell of burnt coffee and yesterday's pastries. A place where billionaires didn't exist, where power couldn't buy preferential treatment. I arrived first, exactly as I'd planned. I needed to see him walk in, needed that moment to prepare myself before our eyes met. Dr. Chen had offered to come with me. Ellis had practically begged to be there, but I'd said no to both. Some confrontations you have to face alone, not because you're strong enough, but because no one else can carry the weight of what needs to be said. I sat in the back booth, wearing jeans and a sweater. Ellis had bought me clothes that cost $30 instead of $3,000. My hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, no armor. Just Marie. The door opened at exactly 2 p.m., and Thomas walked in. I barely recognized him. The man who'd always moved through the world with absolute certainty now looked lost. His suit was expensive but rumpled. He'd lost weight, I could see it in his face. And his eyes, those eyes that used to assess and calculate and control, they looked haunted. He saw me, and his entire body froze. For 10 seconds, we just stared at each other across that shabby coffee shop like strangers recognizing something familiar in each other's faces. Then he walked toward me, and I forced myself not to look away. The door brought December air and the ghost of Thomas's cologne, the same one from our wedding day. My stomach twisted. He looked smaller somehow, like grief had physically shrunk him. What happens in the next few minutes will determine if healing is even possible. Stay with me, because this conversation, it's everything. Thomas slid into the booth across from me, and the silence stretched so tight I thought it might snap. You look good, he finally said, and his voice cracked on the word good. I'm alive, I replied. That's more than I would have been if I'd stayed. He flinched like I'd slapped him. Marie, let me talk first. My hands were shaking, so I pressed them flat against the table. You came here to speak, but I disappeared because no one let me speak. So now you're going to listen. Thomas nodded, and I saw something I'd never seen before: submission. He wasn't negotiating, he wasn't managing, he was surrendering. I took a breath and began. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because loving you was killing me. Not intentionally, I know that, but intent doesn't matter when the result is the same. I didn't know, Thomas whispered. Dr. Sanders said. Dr. Sanders worked for you. He told you what you wanted to hear, and you let him because it was easier than admitting you'd built our entire marriage around controlling me. Thomas opened his mouth to defend himself, then closed it, learning, maybe, that some truths don't have defenses. You chose my doctors, my medications, my schedule, what I was allowed to know about my own body. My voice was steady, stronger than I'd expected. You told yourself you were protecting me, but Thomas, you were erasing me. I thought I was helping. His hands were trembling on the table. I thought if I handled everything, you'd be free to just be happy. I was never free, I said quietly. That's the point you keep missing. You can't be happy in a prison, even if the bars are made of good intentions. Comment below if you've ever had to explain to someone how their love felt like control, because this moment, this is what real accountability looks like. Thomas's face crumpled, and I saw tears forming real ones, not the calculated grief he'd performed for cameras. "I'm so sorry," he said. "Marie, I'm so goddamn sorry. I didn't see it. I thought I was being a good husband. I thought—" His voice broke completely. "I thought I knew better than you. Better than your own instincts about your own body. You did, and it almost killed me." I know. He was crying now, this man who'd built an empire on never showing weakness. "I've replayed every moment since Ellis's press conference. Every decision I made for you instead of with you. Every time I dismissed what you were feeling because it didn't fit what the doctor said, what I wanted to believe. Watching him break down should have felt satisfying, but it just felt sad. Because this was the man I'd loved once, before the money, before the power, before he learned that the world would bend to his will and assumed his wife should too. What happened to us?" I asked, and it came out more vulnerable than I'd intended. Thomas looked up, his eyes red. "I stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as something to perfect, to protect, to manage." He wiped his face with his sleeve, something the old Thomas would never have done. "I turned our marriage into another business project. And by the time I realized what I'd done, you were gone." The coffee shop was mostly empty, but I still lowered my voice. "The girls. How are they really?" Thomas's face softened and shattered at the same time. "They miss you every single day. Betty thinks you're sick in a hospital somewhere. Maria thinks you're mad at us." I've been trying to explain, but how do I tell 3.5-year-olds that their mother left because their father, he couldn't finish? "Can I see them? Are you coming home?" And there it was. The question under the question. The hope buried in desperation. Hit that subscribe button, because Marie's answer to this question, it's not what anyone expects, and it sets up the ending perfectly. I looked at Thomas, this broken, regretful man who genuinely seemed to understand what he'd done, and I knew what I had to say. "No, I'm not coming home. Not to that penthouse. Not to that life. Not as the woman I was." Thomas's face fell, but he nodded like he'd expected it. "I understand. But," I continued, "I'm not disappearing again either. Betty and Maria need their mother, and you need to learn how to be a partner instead of a manager." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'll come back to Chicago. I'll see the girls. We'll figure out co-parenting or joint custody or whatever works for them, but we're doing it on my terms. With my doctors. With my decisions about my own life." Thomas leaned forward. "I'll do whatever you need. Therapy, couples, counseling. I'll sign whatever agreements." "Stop." I held up my hand. "You're already doing it again. Already trying to fix this your way. I need you to understand. I don't need you to have the answers anymore. I need you to accept that I have my own." He sat back, and I watched him process what I was saying. Really process it. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, you tell me what you need. You set the boundaries. You decide." Those words, "you decide," they were the words I'd been waiting 3 years to hear. The door to the coffee shop opened, and Ellis walked in. Behind her, holding each of her hands, were Betty and Maria. My heart stopped. Thomas turned, saw them, and looked back at me with wide eyes. "I didn't," Ellis said. "I asked her to bring them," I said, "because whatever happens between us, our daughters need to see their mother. Today, now." Betty and Maria hadn't seen me yet. They were looking around the unfamiliar coffee shop with careful curiosity. Then Maria's eyes found mine. "Mommy?" The word was small, uncertain, like she was afraid I might disappear again. I slid out of the booth and knelt on the dirty floor as both my daughters ran toward me. "If you're not crying right now, you're stronger than me. Share this with someone who needs to understand that coming back doesn't always mean returning to the same place you left." They crashed into me with the force of 3.5-year-olds who'd been missing their mother for 6 months, and I breathed them in strawberry shampoo, maple syrup from breakfast, the specific warmth only children carry. Home. This was home. "Where were you?" Betty asked, her face buried in my shoulder. "I was sick, baby. Really sick. And I had to go away to get better." "Are you better now?" Maria pulled back to look at my face, her little hands touching my cheeks like she was making sure I was real. "I'm better. I'm so much better. Are you coming home?" I glanced at Thomas, who was watching us with an expression that looked like hope and grief mixed together. "Not to our old home," I said carefully, "but I'm coming back to Chicago, to be with you, to be your mommy again." Thomas stood up slowly. "Girls, why don't you show mommy what you brought?" Betty reached into her backpack and pulled out a drawing stick figures of our family, all holding hands. Me in the middle, even though I'd been gone. I drew this for when you came back, Betty said. Thomas caught himself. It's perfect, Betty. It's perfect. I looked up at him, and something passed between us. Not forgiveness exactly, not reconciliation, but understanding. We destroyed the marriage we had, but maybe, with hard work and humility and time, we could build something new. Not for us, for them. Thank you, I said to Thomas, for bringing them. Thank you for coming back, he replied, even if it's not the way I hoped. Comment below. Do you think Marie and Thomas can co-parent successfully after everything that happened? Because the final chapter shows us what happens when broken people try to build something new from the wreckage. That afternoon in the coffee shop wasn't a happy ending. It was the beginning of something harder than a fairy tale. Real life, messy and complicated, with two people who'd hurt each other trying to do better for the sake of two little girls who deserved more than what we'd given them. I wasn't the woman I'd been. I wouldn't be her again. But I was someone stronger, someone who'd chosen survival, someone who'd learned that disappearing from a life that's killing you isn't cowardice. It's courage. One chapter left. Chapter 9 reveals where everyone ended up, what happened to Dr. Sanders, and whether Marie and Thomas found a way forward. Subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion of the story that started with a disappearance and ended with a resurrection. 1 year later, I stood in my own apartment, not a penthouse, just a sunny 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park watching Betty and Maria build a fort out of couch cushions, and I realized something profound. I'd spent so long trying to be Mrs. Thomas Larry that I'd forgotten how to just be Marie. But here, in this space I'd chosen with my own money from the trust fund my mother left me, I was learning who that woman was. Not the girl who'd fallen in love with a man's potential. Not the wife who'd disappeared into someone else's vision of perfection. Not even the ghost everyone had searched for. Just Marie Kane. Mother. Survivor. Woman who'd chosen herself when choosing herself was the hardest thing in the world. The past year had been complicated in ways fairy tales never prepare you for. There was no clean resolution. No moment where everything clicked into place and became easy. Instead, there were 1,000 small choices, each one reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost. If this story has meant something to you, take a second to hit that like button. Because this ending, it's not the one we usually get to hear. The one where survival is messy and beautiful and enough. The first 3 months after that coffee shop reunion were the hardest. Betty and Maria had been so excited to have their mother back that they'd clung to me constantly, afraid I'd disappear again if they looked away. And I'd let them. I'd rearrange my entire life around being present, truly present in theirs. We did therapy together, the three of us. A child psychologist who specialized in family trauma helped them understand that mommy had been sick, that leaving wasn't about them, that love sometimes means making impossible choices. But you're not leaving again, right? Maria had asked during one session, her little hand gripping mine so tight it hurt. Never, I'd promised. Not unless you want me to leave the room because you're annoyed with me. Betty had giggled. Like when you make us eat vegetables? Exactly like that. Those sessions taught me something crucial. Honesty, even painful honesty, builds trust faster than comfortable lies. My daughters deserved to know their mother was human, flawed, and fighting like hell to be better. Thomas and I had gone to therapy too, separately at first, then together when we could manage being in the same room without the weight of everything we'd broken crushing us both. Our therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Patricia Moore, didn't let Thomas hide behind good intentions. You controlled your wife's medical care, she'd said bluntly during our third session. Not because you're a monster, but because you believed your intelligence and resources made you more qualified to make decisions about her body than she was. Do you see how that's abuse? Thomas had wanted to argue. Thomas and I had gone to therapy too. Separately at first, then together when we could manage being in the same room without the weight of everything we'd broken crushing us both. Our therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Patricia Moore, didn't let Thomas hide behind good intentions. You controlled your wife's medical care, she'd said bluntly during our third session. Not because you're a monster, but because you believed your intelligence and resources made you more qualified to make decisions about her body than she was. Do you see how that's abuse? Thomas had wanted to argue. I'd watched him wrestle with it. This man who'd built an empire on being right. Yes, he'd finally said. Yes, I see it. That acknowledgement, real acknowledgement without excuses, that's what made co-parenting possible. We'd signed a custody agreement that gave me primary custody with generous visitation for Thomas. Not because courts forced it, but because Thomas had agreed. "You're their mother," he'd said, "and you've proven you'll do anything to protect them, even from me." It wasn't romantic, but it was honest. Comment below if you've ever had to rebuild trust with someone who broke you, because what Marie and Thomas create isn't a reconciliation, it's something more realistic and maybe more important. Dr. Marcus Sanders had lost his medical license. The investigation Ellis's press conference triggered had uncovered a pattern of patient management that crossed clear ethical lines, particularly with female patients whose husbands or male family members were paying his fees. 4 other women had come forward with similar stories. One had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer that went untreated for 8 months while doctors waited for the right time to tell her. She'd survived, but barely. The medical board's report had been damning. Dr. Sanders consistently prioritized the emotional comfort of male family members over the medical autonomy and well-being of his female patients. When I'd heard the news, I'd felt vindicated and sick at the same time. How many women had suffered because powerful men decided they couldn't handle truth? But there was justice too. Lawsuits, reforms, new protocols at hospitals across Illinois about patient rights and information disclosure. My disappearance had exposed cracks in a system that desperately needed breaking. Ellis had become something of a reluctant hero. She'd been profiled in magazines, invited to speak at medical ethics conferences, even offered a book deal. "I'm not the hero," she'd told me over coffee one morning. "You are. I just refuse to let you die quietly." "You saved my life," I'd said. "No, you saved your own life. I just held the door open." That's the thing about survival people don't talk about. It's rarely one dramatic moment. It's a series of small choices. Leaving when staying feels safer. Speaking when silence feels easier. Choosing yourself when everyone says you're being selfish. My health had stabilized completely. Dr. Chen's treatment plan had worked better than anyone expected. My lupus was in full remission, managed with medication I actually understood, and a care team that spoke to me, not around me. I'd switched to a new doctor in Chicago, a woman named Dr. Lisa Park, who'd started every appointment the same way. "What are you noticing in your body? What concerns do you have? You're the expert on yourself." That phrase, "you're the expert on yourself," it had become my mantra. Share this story with someone who needs permission to choose themselves, because that's what this whole story has been about, learning that saving yourself isn't selfish. Betty and Maria were thriving in ways that broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. Maria had started asking questions, big questions about choices and bodies, and when it's okay to say no to adults. I answered every single one honestly, age-appropriately, teaching her the lessons I'd learned too late. Betty had become protective of me in sweet ways, always checking if I was eating enough, if I was tired, if I needed to rest. My little caretaker, learning from her mother's mistakes to value health over appearance. They split time between my apartment and Thomas's penthouse, and slowly, painfully, we'd figured out how to be parents together without being married. Thomas had changed too. He'd stepped back from his company, appointed a new CEO, started going to his own therapy. He'd published an open letter acknowledging what he'd done, not defending it, not explaining it away, just owning it. "I prioritize control over partnership," he'd written. "I made decisions about my wife's health that weren't mine to make. I hurt the person I loved most because I believed my way was the only way. I was wrong." Some people had praised his accountability. Others said it was too little, too late. Both things were true. We'd never be married again. I knew that with absolute certainty. But we were learning to be something else. 2 people who'd broken each other, rebuilding something new for the sake of 2 little girls who deserve better than what we'd given them. Last call to subscribe if you haven't already, because stories like this, they're the ones we need to hear, where endings aren't perfect, but they're real. 6 months ago, I'd started speaking publicly. Not about Thomas specifically, but about medical autonomy, about recognizing when love becomes control, about the invisible ways women are erased even in wealthy, perfect marriages. The first speech had been terrifying. Standing on a stage at a women's health conference, looking out at hundreds of faces, knowing I was about to admit everything I'd been ashamed of. But then I'd started talking, and the words had flowed like water that had been dammed too long. I disappeared because staying meant dying, I'd said. Not dramatically, not obviously. Just slowly, quietly, in a way everyone could dismiss as stress or anxiety or me being too sensitive. And when I finally chose myself, the world called me selfish. But survival isn't selfish. It's sacred. The standing ovation had lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, 17 women had waited to talk to me, each one sharing their own story of medical gaslighting, of being managed instead of heard, of learning to trust themselves over the systems that claim to protect them. That's when I'd understood my disappearance wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who'd been told her pain wasn't real, her instincts weren't valid, her voice didn't matter. Now, watching Betty and Maria laugh in their cushion fort, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the artificial peace of a controlled life. Not the silence of suppressed needs. But real peace, the kind that comes from knowing yourself and choosing yourself and building a life on your own terms. "Mommy, come in the fort," Maria called. I crawled into their makeshift fortress, squeezing between my daughters, and Maria rested her head on my shoulder. "Mommy, do you ever think about when you were gone?" Betty asked quietly. "Every day," I said honestly. "Do you wish you didn't have to leave?" I thought about that question, really thought about it. I wish I'd never gotten sick. I wish things had been different, but I don't regret surviving. Because if I hadn't left, I wouldn't be here with you right now. "We're glad you came back," Maria said simply. "Me too, baby, me too." Later that night, after Thomas picked up the girls for his weekend, Ellis came over with takeout and wine. "You doing okay?" she asked, studying my face. "I'm good, really good." "No regrets?" I thought about the penthouse I'd left, the marriage that had ended, the woman I'd been who'd made herself smaller and smaller until she nearly disappeared. "None," I said. "I didn't disappear from my life, Ellis. I stepped into it." She smiled and raised her glass. "To stepping into your life. To surviving," I added. We clinked glasses, and I looked around my small, sunny apartment filled with secondhand furniture and children's drawings and proof that I'd rebuilt myself from nothing. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no prince, no restored kingdom, no magical solution that fixed everything. But it was mine. This life, this identity, this voice I'd fought so hard to reclaim. I'd been the billionaire's wife who disappeared, the woman who chose survival over silence, the mother who learned that sometimes love means leaving. And now I was just Marie. And that was enough. That was everything. Because I didn't disappear from my life, I stepped into it.